Hey guys, so for my first inquiry, I spent an hour riding a city bus on Tuesday night. It was just after dinner time. Um, I really wanted to do this one because I depended on public transportation and buses for about 3 years. Um, Only this spring was when my husband and I were finally given a car, and that's changed. But for most of my recent life, like that's been my reality, something I've had to deal with, and I knew firsthand like what a challenge that can be, and so I really wanted to revisit it from a different lens and point of view, and it was a really cool experience. There were several things that I'd kind of learned previously, during my time riding buses that were definitely reinforced on this trip. The first one was just how much it can limit your opportunities. Like, where you can live, where you work, where you shop and go grocery shopping, where you go to church. Like, everything depends on what is on the bus route, what is, easy for you to get to. Before, like, I would always go grocery shopping at Smith's just because that was the most conveniently placed grocery store for me to get to on the bus. And I think that that is something that a lot of people have to deal with, like maybe they can't get a certain job because it's just not feasible for them to get there by public transportation, or maybe they can't live in cheaper housing because there's no buses anywhere nearby. Like, there's so many things you have to think about. Another thing that stood out to me was that it takes just a lot more time to get places. It even like surprised me while I was riding. We just didn't get very far in an hour. Like, you'd think you could, you know, go pretty far. Go, I don't know. I was like, are we gonna have to like do multiple buses? But like, no, you really like. It takes a while to get anywhere on a bus, and also just time like walking to the bus stop, waiting for the bus. Like, it just takes so much longer. You have to really plan ahead when you want to get somewhere at a certain time, and that just eats away at your day and the time that you have. Kind of going along with that is just how you're dependent on the bus schedule. You can only, leave at a certain time, you can only get back at a certain time, and so you really have to plan your activities around that. I had a coworker who also doesn't really have access to a car that used to work with, and she couldn't come in and do the early shift that my work asked her to do because the buses didn't leave early enough for her to get there. So that was a huge problem for her. And I think there's just lots of those sorts of inconveniences or even missed opportunities that can happen when people have to rely on public transportation and don't have access to a car. There are several other things that were surprising to me or I hadn't thought about before that I think are really good takeaways from this experience. This was the first time that I really thought about other people's experiences on public transportation, and that it actually is like a lot harder for, many other people than it is for me. For me, it's just like, kind of an inconvenience, but for other people, it can be a lot worse. Then when I was on this week, I saw someone get on in a wheelchair, and it made me think about people with disabilities. And it's much more challenging for them to use public transportation like buses. Like, even if it is accessible, it's still harder. And I'm sure for some more, serious disabilities, whether physical or mental, it can be even impossible or just extremely difficult for them to use. So that's something that they have to deal with and struggle with. I think it's also extra difficult for people who, fear for their physical safety. I was imagining if someone were elderly and, maybe had trouble with like balance or just recognizing where to go. Also, in the past, I've seen like small children riding buses, which I imagine, not every parent would let their child do. A woman, sometimes it can feel unsafe to be on public transportation. Um, I and I just anyone else like that is it can be less secure, I guess. That's the takeaway there. And if you're already, you know, have extra precautions that you would like to take that are impossible to take on a bus, then that can be a problem for you. Another big takeaway which is sort of obvious, is just how important it is to have a good free public transportation system in your city, because there's a lot of people that depend on it. Here in Provo, obviously, there's a lot of students, but there's plenty of other people that use it too, and more so in other cities. I've even seen homeless people like using it for shelter in the wintertime. They can get on a free bus and ride for quite a while, and it gives them a chance to get in out of the cold, which maybe other people using the buses don't like, but is really important for them. And so I think it's important that we invest in public resources like this one. As I was thinking about how to apply it to my future teaching career, I think as a teacher, it's super important to remember that students have unequal access to resources and opportunities. And it's important to account for that to give everyone a chance to succeed. Also, to be understanding to difficulties that some people have. If a student is relying on public transportation, they might not be able to get places, or they might be running late, or, any number of things they might be dealing with that you wouldn't think of right off the bat. And so I think it's important to be super understanding and create an environment where students are comfortable, coming to you when they need extra accommodations. And I guess those are all of my thoughts on my experience. I'm excited to hear what everyone else has to say.